The Box of Delights by John Masefield. Chapter 10, Part 2. Kay set off to walk through the jungle. He held his one shoe in his left hand, as that was his only supply of food. He found the going extraordinarily rough with so many fallen trees and branches, but he had not gone long before a most appetizing smell came to his nose. "Oh," he said, "there are people, there's something being cooked." There was no doubt about it. Something very nice was being cooked not very far away. Then Kay thought, supposing when I come through the jungle I find that it's a whole lot of cannibals cooking Man Friday or his brother. I wish I knew what cooked man smelled like. Somehow the smell in his nostrils seemed too pleasant to be the smell of toasted man. He went on with increasing hope that he would soon come to see someone who would feed him. He heard on ahead the pleasant splash of falling water. At this point, somewhere beyond him in the jungle, an old man's wavering voice began to sing a song. As from the first, it seemed a very queer song. Kay sat down on a fallen tree to listen to it. This was the song. "When I was 3 or 2 or 1, I used to go to bed on sun and wake on mun. And when I went to bed on Tues, I woke on wed as trues, I could not choose. When Thurs on Fry, when Fry on Sat, when Sat on Sun, it all fell pat, and that was that. Now that I'm 4 or 5 or 6, it is another bag of tricks, it is a mix. For when tomorrow's bedtime say, I never wake today, but yesterday. Yesterday or the day before, or 2 months since, or 3 or more, in years long o'er. Sometimes, of course, I find this pleasant. I never greatly loved the present, except when eating roasted pheasant, or reading Greek. But still, sometimes I stand aghast, stuck in the week before the last, with all the present turned to past, and now, last week. And what is worse, I sometimes fear, it isn't now but all that's here, but no next year or worse beyond some year. In future time unkenned, unconned, as far away as Trebizond from Tory Weir. And this I ask and fain would know, will now be in a day or so. Is this time next year now or no? Or did now happen long ago? Long ago? Long ago? Or was tomorrow yesterday? Or has it been and gone today? Will no one say? I wish someone would say. The voice trailed off from the tune here and the song ended. The singer muttered to himself 2 or 3 times, yes indeed truly, I wish someone would say. The fact of the matter is, they don't know. Something in the voice made Kay feel sure that the singer would not harm him. He rose from his log and pushed through the scrub towards him. After a few yards the jungle was less thick. He came through the jungle to a clearing where he saw the mouth of a cave, a bubbling spring falling down some rocks near the cave mouth to a rocky pool, and an old man sitting beside a fire, toasting 2 bananas stuck upon skewers, which he held, 1 in each hand. Kay limped towards the old man, who looked at him and said, "Italiano?" Kay shook his head. The man said, "Français?" Kay, who was on surer ground here, said, "Non, English." The old man looked at him in astonishment and with interest. "Come then," he said kindly. "Sit, eat, drink." He took the toasted bananas from the skewers and put them on a broad leaf and offered them to Kay with a big shell full of water. Kay, who was really very hungry, ate the bananas with thankfulness. He looked at the old man who'd welcomed him. He was extraordinarily old, ragged-haired and tatter-bearded. He was dressed like a scarecrow in a most strange patchwork of palm leaves, pieces of old sail, and what may once have been leather. Presently the man spoke in strange English. "You excuse me," the man said, "make pardon. What year in Anno Domini is this?" 1935, Kay said. "What, you say 1900? "Yes," said Kay, opening his hands 3 times and then showing 4 fingers. 1935. "In the future or in the present?" "In the present," Kay said. "Oh," said the old man, "what a thing is time. I have got lost in time." "Tell me, sir, please," Kay said with interest, Are you Mr. Arnold of Tody?" "I was once, young Englishman," he said, "but that was when I belonged to the year of our Lord, which I went out of by my own act. I would have none of it. I went back into the past, and should therefore have a name from the past, such as Alexander." "Why did you go back into the past?" Kay asked. "Why?" Arnold said. "Because of the dullness of the time into which I was born." But tell me, you say you are English. You will please excuse and pardon the English I have never seen. It is true we Italians conquered the land. We have a legend that the English are like rabbits, in that their front teeth stick out, but they are unlike rabbits in that they have tails. You are a strange people. We haven't tails, Kay said. The fact is well known, Arnold said. But about time. I am rather behind in present time. Perhaps I am not in modern time at all, but in future time. It isn't past time. You asked me why I went back into the past. So many things happened in the past. In my young days, life in my country was tedious to a man of thought. I made a way to get back into the past, a certain box. You may not credit it, but a man came all the way from Spain to offer me the elixir of life in exchange for it. He gave me a sip of the elixir, and I let him see the box. But I would not make the exchange, for I could get back into the past by my box. That is, into the past of Europe. You, young Englishman, I do not consider that the past of Europe is worth consideration. I don't know, Kay said. A good many things have happened in Europe. The Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, Napoleon the Great, the Battle of Waterloo, the Great War. The Great War, said Arnold. It was to see that I first gave away my box and spent many years finding a way into the past of Asia. Tell me, in the time that you know, do they speak much of Alexander the Great? He's mentioned sometimes, Kay said. Imagine it, Arnold said. Mentioned sometimes. Is not that typical of European things and people? Rulers and ruled alike, childish, trivial, wanting in will. You can't call Julius Caesar that, Kay said. He only imitated Alexander, Arnold said. Besides, he was bald. I was delighted that he met the end he did. My race, the Italian, has ever been renowned for intelligence. They never showed it more clearly than in ending that public pest. What is your Christian name, young man? Kay, Kay answered. You ought to change it to Alexander, Arnold replied. Young men should have prosperous names, names to live up to. K isn't a name. It's a letter of the alphabet. It is Greek kappa. We Italians dispensed with it. Did you ever meet Alexander? Kay asked. Young man, Arnold said. I was weary of life in toady, so I made the box and wandered into the past of Europe. Oh, it was so dull. Dreary kings, dreary murders, silly wars. So I got out of it as soon as I could. I went into the past of Asia, and you know, a lot of that is very dull. Silly wars again, you know, still rather dreary kings, not very much thought. And then suddenly, in one of those cities in Asia Minor, I first saw Alexander. You never met Alexander? No, indeed, Kay said. I never did. You ought to set to work, Arnold said, to make yourself a box like mine that would take you where you would meet Alexander. As to the present, not that this is the present, it seems like the future. I do not know where he is, but he exists forever in the past. He was the finest young man that ever trod this planet. Beautiful, like young Apollo. The sculptors and the painters, when they wanted to carve or to paint a god, all turned to him. He was all beauty and strength and wisdom. He had only to ride down the street on that horse of his that spoke with a man's voice, and every man would come out with his weapons to follow him to the world's end. Everybody saw that he was the king. In the camps, the men would hurl the spear or shoot with the bow or throw the quoit or wrestle or run, and he could beat the best of them at all these things. Then to think of his army, the earth shaking, and his fleet, the sea taming, his horses, the thunder bearing, and his trumpets, the spirit lifting. Think of his godlike scheme of making the world one kingdom under one worthwhile king, instead of all these dreary little kings. But of course you know of this as well as I do. You have seen Alexander. No, indeed, Kay said, I have not. Well, it is hard to believe that anybody has not seen Alexander, Arnold said, for who knows what beauty is that has not? His hair is beautiful, young man. He has marvellous eyes, and he has a way of leaping onto his horse's back or into his chariot. I last saw him driving a chariot with white horses. He was dressed in leopard skins and had a crown of laurel on his brows, and people flung themselves down crying that he was a god. He paused for a moment, thinking of Alexander. I am behind in my time, if you understand me, young man. I was in the Anno Domini, and then I went back into the past, and the Anno Domini has moved on, and I have only partly moved on. Or perhaps I have moved on too far, if you understand. I think I do partly understand, Kay said. It was Ramon Lilly who came to you from Spain with the elixir. I never paid much attention to the man's name, Arnold said. He was a thinker of my time. I do not believe in the thinkers of my time. Now, the thinker of Alexander's time, Alexander's teacher, Aristotle, he was a real thinker. Do you know I have got your box of delights at present, Kay said. It belongs really to the man who came to you with the elixir. It's a trivial toy, Arnold said. I ought to have let the Spaniard take it and had his elixir in exchange and drunk deep of it, and then I could have gone on and on with Alexander. But permit me to offer you these raisins. I dried them myself in the sun. Alexander used raisins in his campaigns. When soldiers wanted meat, bread, wines, sweetmeats, Alexander, only a few raisins and a little water. What was the race that you said you belonged to, young man? The English, Kay said. Some very small, unimportant race, Arnold answered. I had a list of all the nations of the world that marched with Alexander, and there were no English among them. We were in a great plain covered with tents. One morning he hung out his golden banner, and all those countless nations blew their trumpets and hung out their standards, and away we went. It took a week for the army to pass out of the plain, and then we went over mountains and across rivers. The cities we visited we sacked, but usually the cities opened their gates to us and came out with gold and silver and precious stones. But allow me to offer you this pomegranate. Kay ate the pomegranates and a second one which the old man offered. The old man stood up and said, Now there was one special thing about Alexander that I have not yet told you. When I have told you this, you will understand why it was that his soldiers thought that he was a god. We were marching, if you understand, across a burning waste. Whether it was the Corasmanian waste or the Acheronian waste, I cannot now be sure. In fact, it may have been the Gedrosian waste. Know only that it was a burning, pitiless desert of glare and death and dead men's bones. There were asps in the sand. The glare of that sand made men's blood so thin that an asp bite killed in 3 minutes. Men died of asps, thirst, glare and giddiness. The sand stretched, the sky arched, the glare below, the glare above, the moon at night in the terrible cold with jackals howling. I made a poem of the sky. It arched, we marched, and parched. Some men's tongues shrivelled dry and popped out with the parching. No water there, no drink, only pebbles and buttons to freshen our mouths with. Now some of the soldiers found in a rock at dawn a little scoop of cold water. They thought, now we will win promotion for ourselves by taking this to Alexander. So they brought it to him. It was not more than is in this shell here, but in that place, under that sun, it was life itself, young master. Did Alexander drink it and give these men promotion? He was as thirsty as any soldier there. No, he said, I will not touch what I cannot share with my men. And he poured it out into the sand to his fortune. I tell you once more that there has been nobody in this world like Alexander. Allow me now to recommend to you this egg of the island pheasant which I have baked for you. For salt here is salt of the sea, and for bread this meal of pounded almond. Eat, eat, the young can always enjoy what they eat. Kay ate gladly, for he was indeed hungry. You mentioned, young man, said Arnold suddenly, a certain person who made a figure in the world. Julius Caesar? Kay said. Do not name that person to me. No, another whose name I didn't catch. You called him great. Napoleon? That was the name, the old man said. Who was he? He was a soldier who conquered nearly all Europe, Kay said. Conquered Europe? That miserable collection of barbarians conquered? Could it ever be anything but conquered? Arnold said. And you dare to place these petty pugilists of yours beside the godlike figure of Alexander? You talk with parochial insolence. Were you not so ignorant, it would be my duty to strike you dead, that you debase thus a godlike and glorious figure whose achievements cannot be weighed because there is no balance with which to weigh them, nor other with whom to compare. Presently, young man, I shall perfect yet another box, much greater than any that I have made yet. I entered the past of Europe by one box. I entered the past of Asia by another. But with this third box I will go after Alexander, where he rides on some planet, in some starry place in heaven. I will harness the comets for him, and we will come down, young man, and we will sweep away all these paltry kings, and you English with tails." "We haven't got tails," Kay said. "You know nothing even of your own race," said Arnold angrily, "and you dare to presume to speak about Alexander." Kay was, by this time, terrified of Arnold of Tody, this extraordinary figure of fun, whose matted beard was stuck with twigs and leaves, whose coat was of sail, palm leaf, and old leather, who seemed to be 700 years old, and to have gone with Alexander the Great into India. He was now standing with flaming eyes glaring down at Kay. "Mad as a hatter," Kay thought. "He'll probably tear me piecemeal." At this instant he heard himself called. "Kay! Kay!" There behind him, in a little bay of the sea, so bright and beautiful, were two figures whom he saw to be Herne the Hunter and the woman of the oak tree. On their left hands were the curious rings with the long ways crosses upon them. "Come, Kay, we can take you home. You must not be lost in the past in this way too." "Can you take Arnold of Tody as well?" he said. "He's been most awfully kind to me." "Yes," they said, "let him come." Kay did not quite see how they were to come, but when they reached the beach, the two called, and out of the sea there came tumbling the most beautiful dolphins, drawing a chariot made of one big seashell of the colour of mother of pearl. By the side of these were three bigger dolphins, one with no saddle for Herne the Hunter, two with high-backed saddles of white and scarlet coral and stirrups and reins of amber beads for Kay and Arnold. "You will mount these, Kay," the lady said as she stepped into her chariot and gathered the long reins of seaweed. "Then follow me." "Stick on tight," Herne said. "They're odd mounts at first." The woman had already set off in her chariot. Kay, Herne, and Arnold mounted, and the dolphins at once leaped from the water, plunged in, and again leaped out on a long rush towards home. Soon they were speeding level with the chariot, going swifter and swifter, racing fish against fish, while the woman called to the team and sang to them. "Fin on, leap, skim the foam, swim the green toppling comb of blue seas rolling home under the west wind, from Yucatan to Ind. Shear the sea flowers to stubbles, crush the blue floor to bubbles, gallop, forget your troubles, skimming in gladness the salt sea's madness. Come flying fish, come whales, come mermaids with bright scales, come gulls that ride on gales, and albatrosses that no gale tosses. Speed with us as we thrust the blue ways none can trust, the green ways without dust, salt ways foaming, attend our homing." Instantly, as they sped, the mermaids shot to the surface beside them. Many white, grey, and gleaming birds swooped out of the heavens. The whales surged from below, snorting out glittering fountains. With little whickering flickers, the flying fish leaped beside them like tiny silver arrows. The first moment or two on setting forth, they had been terrified, but now, in all this glitter and leap and speed, with the lady singing and the dolphins going ever faster, the mermaids splashing water at him and himself splashing water back, Kay loved it more than anything that had ever happened to him. It was exquisite to feel the dolphins quivering to the leap, to surge upwards into the bright light with flying fish sparkling on each side, and then to surge down into the water, scattering the spray like bright fire full of rainbows, then to leap on and on, wave after wave, mile after mile. In the thrill and delight of this leaping journey, Kay fell asleep. He was presently aware of Arnold getting off his dolphin at Tibbs Wharf near the Lock and Key. He half opened his eyes, thought he heard some church bells chime, and then woke up drowsily in his seat at Seekings, under the valance of the dressing table, where the box lay on the floor. He went down to lunch. It was lunchtime, and the others were there. "Well, Kay," Jemima said after a while, "you have seemed to us half asleep ever since lunch began. Aren't you going to say something?" "Say something," Kay said. "Where is Arnold?" "Arnold," they said. "Who's Arnold?" "It's very odd," Kay said, and he went to the window in order that he might pull himself together. It was very strange, but there, at the top of the garden, was a strange figure of fun, dressed seemingly in old leather, bits of sail and palm leaf, staring with admiration at the church tower. "That's a tramp," Maria said. "Well, as it's Christmas Eve, I must take him some food," Kay said. So he cut some meat, some bread, and a chunk of cheese, pocketed 2 mince pies, and went out to refresh poor Arnold of Tody. But when he reached the top of the garden, Arnold had slipped through the wicket gate and was gone. Kay looked along the lane and elsewhere for him, but Arnold was gone.